They say home is where you feel safe, but what happens when racism rips that safety away? Imagine working your whole life, finally building the dream you were promised, only to have it stolen. Not because of money, not because of law, but because of the color of your skin. This isn't just one man's nightmare. It's a reflection of what so many have faced in silence. And the question is chilling. How far would you go to fight back when everything you love is stripped away just for being who you are? Hit like and subscribe to join our community. Before everything unraveled, Marcus lived a life most would call ordinary, but to him, it was finally extraordinary. After years of service in the military, he had saved enough to buy a small ranch on the edge of town. It wasn't just land. It was freedom, stability, and proof that all his sacrifices had meant something. Every morning, he'd wake to the sound of roosters, the smell of fresh-cut grass, and the pride of knowing this soil was his. Neighbors saw him as disciplined, respectful, and hard-working. But beneath the polite smiles of the community lay something darker. Resentment that a black man had carved out success in a place many believed he didn't belong. The Homeowners Association, run by a few power-hungry individuals, had rules for everything: paint colors, lawn height, even the kind of trucks you could park in your own driveway. Marcus followed every guideline, never wanting trouble, but deep down, he noticed the stares linger a little too long. The jokes carried a sharper edge, and whispers cut off whenever he walked by. Still, he brushed it off, convinced that if he kept his head down, no one could touch what he had built. What he didn't know was that the quiet hostility was just the beginning, that the very people, sworn to protect the neighborhood's standards, were already plotting to take everything from him. At first, the signs were subtle. Marcus noticed warning letters in his mailbox, claims that his grass was too tall, his truck was unsightly, or that his small barn violated community guidelines. He double-checked the rule book, mowed twice a week, even parked the truck away from the main road. Still, the letters kept coming. Neighbors whispered, "It's just the HOA doing their job," but Marcus knew better. The rules seemed to bend depending on who you were. His white neighbors had overgrown lawns, peeling paint, and broken-down cars sitting for weeks. Yet no fines, no threats. The message was clear. The rules weren't the problem. He was. The tension grew. At meetings, HOA leaders dismissed him with smirks, talking over him whenever he tried to speak. One evening, he overheard them laughing, joking about keeping standards high and not letting the neighborhood turn into something else. The words stung. They weren't talking about grass or trucks. They were talking about him. Then came the blow he never expected. While Marcus was away on duty, serving the very country these people called home, the HOA filed claims that he had abandoned his property. Without his knowledge, they moved to auction his ranch. By the time Marcus returned, he found strangers walking his land, pointing at his barn, asking questions about their new property. His heart sank. Years of sacrifice, sweat, and service were being erased with the stroke of a pen. He confronted the HOA board, demanding answers. Their response was chilling. "You should have kept up with the rules. Maybe this neighborhood isn't the right fit for you." Marcus felt the ground shift beneath him. This wasn't about rules, it was about race. His achievements, his service, his dignity, it all meant nothing to them. But Marcus wasn't alone. Word began to spread. Some neighbors, horrified by what they saw, quietly warned him of the HOA's backroom dealings. Others whispered that the board had ties to officials who looked the other way. And while most were too afraid to stand up, Marcus realized he had something the HOA never expected, connections that reached far beyond the neighborhood, because this time they hadn't just targeted a homeowner. They had gone after a soldier, one with allies in places far higher than their petty power, and soon the very system they had twisted against him would turn back on them. Marcus thought he had seen the worst, but nothing prepared him for the moment he held the official letter in his hands. His ranch, his life's work, was no longer his. The HOA had sold it off while he wore the uniform of the very country that promised him freedom. The words blurred as his hands shook. Rage and helplessness tangled in his chest, threatening to crush him. Standing on his own porch, now claimed by strangers, he felt the weight of generations pressing down. How many before him had lost everything, not because they failed, but because a system was designed to see them fail? The bitter truth was staring him in the face. They wanted to erase him, to prove he didn't belong here. For a brief, gut-wrenching moment, Marcus considered walking away. Fighting a machine this corrupt seemed impossible. But then he remembered the faces of his fellow soldiers, the oath he had sworn, the sacrifices he had made. He hadn't survived battlefields abroad just to surrender to racism at home. This was his breaking point, and his turning point. He reached out to his contacts, pulling strings the HOA never imagined he had. State attorneys, military advocates, even veterans organizations began to look into the case. Suddenly, the same board members who mocked him now sat under investigation, their smug confidence cracking as the spotlight turned on them. The fight wasn't over, but the tide had shifted. Marcus was no longer the victim silently enduring injustice. He had become the force they never saw coming. And as one board member muttered, pale and trembling during the first hearing, "We picked the wrong man to mess with," Marcus thought he had seen the worst. But nothing prepared him for the day the official notice arrived. His ranch, the land he had built with his own blood and sweat, was no longer his. According to the HOA, it had been legally transferred. The words cut deeper than any wound he had faced in combat. He drove home, fists tight on the steering wheel, only to find strangers unloading boxes into his barn. Children ran across his yard as if it had always been theirs. And standing in the driveway was the HOA president, arms folded, smirk plastered across her face. "You should have known better," she said coldly. "This community has rules. Maybe you never belonged here in the first place." For a moment, Marcus felt powerless. Every sacrifice, every sleepless night overseas, every day he had fought to prove himself, had been stripped away with smug laughter and forged paperwork. It wasn't just about property anymore. This was about erasing his worth, telling him he didn't matter. But then, something shifted. Marcus reached for his phone and made a single call. Not to a lawyer, not to a friend, to someone who had seen him serve, someone who owed him nothing but respect, the state attorney. Within hours, the same HOA board that mocked him found themselves surrounded by questions they couldn't laugh off. Investigators pulled records. Reporters started calling. Those smug smiles began to fade as the truth came out. The HOA had illegally manipulated documents, targeting Marcus with an agenda built on prejudice. The very system they had used to destroy him was now turning against them. And for the first time in months, Marcus felt something powerful, hope. But this wasn't over. Not yet, because what came next wasn't just justice. It was payback. The tables turned faster than anyone expected. The same HOA members who once mocked Marcus now sat in courtrooms, scrambling for excuses as their lies were exposed one by one. The fraudulent documents, the targeted fines, the abuse of power, it all came crashing down. What they had dismissed as just rules was revealed for what it truly was: calculated discrimination. Marcus didn't just win his land back. He won something deeper, the validation that his fight had meaning. The ranch was returned to him, but more importantly, the board members faced lawsuits, resignations, and public shame. Their power, once unchecked, was stripped away under the weight of accountability. Yet the victory was bittersweet. Marcus had reclaimed his home, but the scars of the battle ran deep. He had fought enemies overseas, but this, fighting for dignity in his own backyard, cut differently. It wasn't just about him anymore. His story became a mirror, reflecting what countless others endure quietly, losing homes, jobs, and opportunities simply because of the color of their skin. And that's the true weight of racism. It doesn't always come in slurs or open hate. Sometimes it hides in fine print, in rules designed to exclude, in systems that punish some while protecting others. Marcus's resilience turned his pain into a warning and a lesson, because the real question isn't whether he won. The question is, how many others never get the chance to fight back? And if we stay silent when injustice happens to one, How long before it happens to us all? If this story touched you, don't just watch. Be part of the change. Hit subscribe and join our community of voices that matter.